Hi everyone, my name is Lily. I'm the book reviewer behind Utopia State of Mind, and today is going to be a very different video. I thought about this because I've been reading a bunch of kind of adult science fiction, adult epic science fiction kind of books recently, and I've been thinking a lot about how my relationship with science fiction has changed as a person and as a reader, and so I kind of wanted to chat about that with you today. I don't have an outline. I don't have notes. So this might be slightly a more rambly video. So grab yourself a drink or a snack. I'm going to try to keep it concise. But basically, what I want to talk about is how I began reading sci-fi and why that perspective has kind of may impacted how I view sci-fi as a genre now, and also my feelings about sci-fi now, I guess. So those are kind of the three parts. And so the first part, as I said, my journey with sci-fi. So I have always so my dad has really loved Star Trek and has similar as and that, has been one of my sort of shows that I watched growing up with him. Not a lot extensively, but a little bit. We're a big fan of Voyager. We're also a big fan of the Whale movie. So that was kind of the first sci-fi I really started being involved in. I did never read sci-fi though. I would never say that I sort like tried to seek out sci-fi. I think if I kind of remember in my memory, one of the earliest sci-fis I actually did read as a teen was Shade's Children by Garth Nix. I bring it up because I'm pretty sure, and you could correct me if I'm wrong because I'm going off of my memory now, but I'm pretty sure there were kind of like these robotic creatures, sort of. But anyway, that's the only thing I can think of, which kind of was approaching sci-fi as a teen, reading as a teen. And so basically from that until I want to say college, that was basically it. I just didn't see anyone that I really knew reading sci-fi or watching sci-fi stuff besides my dad. And my dad really watched Star Trek. And so I just didn't have a lot of points of contact with sci-fi and people who really love sci-fi. And towards the latter, like maybe the last year of high school, things started shifting a little bit. I ended up kind of, I ended up sort of being first shown more sci-fi things by a past partner of mine. And that was interesting. I think I ended up watching Firefly and Serendipity. Is it called Serendipity? Like the sequel basically to Firefly. So that was it, but that was very much kind of a thing that we did together. It wasn't something that I did on my own. I really enjoyed it, but it didn't really seem, I didn't really know where to start, basically. And it certainly was not a book. When I got into college and into university, I ended up being sort of tangentially, I guess, introduced into the world of literary science fiction. Basically, that same past partner person was taking a sci-fi course in school, in college, and I was allowed to, or I met them after class, and so I was able to see kind of the things. I was able to look at the syllabuses and look at kind of the questions that they were asked, but I was not invited into this space. And I was not encouraged as well to join, which is interesting to me because looking back, it was kind of a big thing for them. And so looking back, I'm kind of like, well, why didn't they? Like, why wasn't I being asked, hey, do you want to read this thing with me, right? Because I was majoring. Well, actually, at the time, I didn't really have a major. I was kind of bopping around between a lot of different things. But relatively around that same thing, I was definitely starting to lean towards English literature or towards literature. So it was kind of a natural transition to be like, let's read these things. Let's talk about these things. These were never conversations that were ever given to me. And all I can remember are very, very distinct memories of having read or having started to look at these kind of texts on my own, look at the articles that they were reading, and really being wished that I could enter into this conversation, but it was such an exclusionary space. The class was basically made up of a bunch of guys, and basically at the end of class, and it was also a dude professor, at the end of class, I just distinctly remember watching everyone file out, and there was this like little mom, this little group of also dudes who would kind of crowd around and ask all these questions and be like, what did you think about this? What did you think about this? And I just remember so clearly wanting to be involved in a discussion of that caliber and also so clearly being excluded. And I didn't even have the language or the rhetoric to know how to be involved in it. Do you know what I mean? How to ask to be involved in it. And I didn't have the self confidence in myself to butt into it. Part of this is obviously because I was growing up and I was my first year of college at all, period. Everyone who was in that space was also at least 1 year older than me. So for a lot of different reasons, it just felt like a space I was not welcome in. And that was kind of how it was. I didn't end up reading a bunch of those texts or a bunch of those things because I just greatly got this feeling that it was not for me at all. During that time, though, I was channel switching or channel flipping, and I did end up seeing my first ever Doctor Who episode, which was the Van Gogh episode with Amy Pond, which is why that Doctor and like Amy, their relationship is super nostalgic for me, even though my favorite Doctor is David Tennant. But I remember that also kind of being like, oh, this is really intriguing, right? So Doctor Who, I think, makes a really good comparison between having some science, having science within it, having the science fiction aspect. You have aliens, you have, spaceships, but it also is very, very commercial, and it's also super, it's aired on TV still right now, and it's also for other people to watch, right? I think that, like in Star Trek and everything like that, things that are made for TV and film have to try to have a larger appeal. These things and these products cannot necessarily survive only being kind of for the die-hard minorities or the die-hard fans. So that was interesting to me, but I don't think that my love, or I don't think even I ended up being in a literary space until after, what was it? I think what ended up happening actually is that when not that same semester that I was, excluded from that space. I think in my second year, where things were on the rocks / maybe ending between this past person of mine, I ended up finding a class that had been cross-listed as being about science fiction and also women's studies, which was also something I was kind of playing with at that time, majoring in whatever. And that to me was kind of like, well, this seems like it would not only satisfy, one thing, it would also satisfy two birds, one palm kind of situation. So I should just try it. And wow, that the trend right now, which is kind of like, oh, someone's going to tell you not to do this, but you have to do it. I don't know how else to explain that TikTok trend currently going on the moment, but that was sort of it for me. And I just remember being so captivated. We started out, I wish that I could go back and find the syllabus, but, we read Octavia Butler, who to this day is one of my favorite science fiction authors, period. We read Octavia Butler. We read, who is the author of He, She, and It? We read a bunch of different authors that I really, really loved, and that really looked at the way that science fiction can explore a theme, explore a topic that is also directly relevant to me at that time, and things that I was thinking about, and the sort of way that this literature can be more than entertainment and can really be thought exploration, can really push the boundaries of where we as a society are thinking, what conversations we are having right now, what conversations we should be having. And that to me was fantastic. I think my brain sort of started firing in all synapses for that one, and I just loved it, and I have never stopped loving it. So that was the first course, that was the first professor that I'd ever seen actually even talking about this interaction. And so I ended up just running with it. And so I ended up, flash forward to the future, ended up writing two theses, on science fiction and literature because I ended up falling in love with it so much. I think it is so fascinating. My roots about book reviewing come back to literature. They come back to my background in English literature and into picking apart things, into looking at themes and characters and symbols, and they also go back to science fiction. They go back to looking at the ways that, at that time I had been looking at the ways and the conversations that literature had been happening with the past. You look at the books that have been already published and the things they were talking about at that moment and what kind of resonances you can find. But to me, science fiction felt so transformative in the way that it talks about the future. It talks about how we can imagine the future and how sometimes we are excluded from the future. See N.K. Jemison's, what is the title of it?
How Long Till Black Future Month.
I will leave the cover here. But basically, also the ways that we are excluded from conversations about the future. And it has just been an experience that has been life-changing, which is so intriguing to me because it also started off as feeling something that was unattainable and unapproachable. And so at that time, when I did my 2 theses, I focused on different times on both robots and aliens, 2 different projects, but still, and the ways that it kind of talks about how we can transform or transcend this idea of gender and this idea of humanity, and how we kind of, I realize now that I think about it, how we kind of wear these things as skins and how we can push ourselves to go further is kind of how I will describe that. Obviously, there's much more to discuss. I wrote whole papers about it. And so that's kind of how that's how, if I think about it, how I covered the first 2, right? How I originally started off with and what drew me to the science fiction genre, period. Afterwards, when I started looking at kind of classic science fiction and looking at all of these things, and also when I delved a lot more into Samuel Delany and when I delved more into kind of other authors, I still, though, felt this kind of exclusionary feeling. And I don't think I'm the only one, because I hear a lot from people about how they think that sci-fi is super unapproachable. I think it's because, and I could go on forever about this, but I think it's because we have this, at least in the, I'm coming from an American kind of like Western standpoint for this one, but we have this idea of sci-fi as seemingly kind of always being hard sci-fi, seemingly being these stories about space and interdimensional travel, and having all of this intense space needing, like necessity to have that information to enjoy and to understand a story. To me, that has kind of stemmed from where that exclusionary space has been. I don't think this fully encapsulates all the different things that science fiction can talk about, and specifically why I have loved works from Octavia Butler, for example. But I do think that that's kind of the perspective we have. I have maintained forever that it's not that you don't like sci-fi, it's that you haven't read the right sci-fi book for you. I have even made it a point at various points in my channel to talk about the premises of a book and kind of leave out till the end that they're science fiction. Or to talk about, like, if you like, for example, plants, here's a sci-fi that talks about plants. You know what I mean? Like, it makes me so sad, because I've been on that side of the fence where sci-fi has just felt unapproachable and has felt like it's not a space for me to even include myself in the conversation. And it is just so heartbreaking, because there is a sci-fi, I maintain there is a sci-fi book for everybody. I will help you find it, honestly. And so, I went into a whole series, I think on Instagram, basically, before I even had a YouTube channel, where every so often or every day I would recommend a different sci-fi that I felt like defied all of these expectations that one has of kind of the genre. Sci-fi classics and sci-fi things to me have felt very exclusionary in the way that they have kind of centered not only hard sci-fi, but cis white het dudes. That was most of what my experiences was as well, personally. So there is a sci-fi book for you out there. I promise you there is. And I have done so much work. I still read so much sci-fi as a person. A little bit less so now than I did when I first started book reviewing. When I first started book reviewing, I only read sci-fi and fantasy. Now I have branched out. And also, I've branched out in a lot of different ways. But yeah, I have felt this way so deeply. And so that's kind of how my transitionary period was. Right at the beginning, it was super revelatory because I was thinking about all the things I would talk about. And then as I did more and more research into it, I realized that actually the space was a little bit more to what I thought it was, and just feeling like I wanted more. I wanted more conversations to be had. I think I think additionally in literature, we can see in the YA space specifically, YA sci-fi is not having a boom. Right at the time, maybe in the 2010s, YA dystopia was having a boom, and to me, I think that that's an interesting thing to have a boom because it feels, you either have post-apocalyptic things in the YA dystopia, but it's to me a more approachable, more commercial kind of sci-fi in a lot of different aspects, because I think a lot of us can kind of more clearly envision a way in which the world has ended or a way in which the world has gone downhill than we can envision a way that we've gone to space or aliens or, any other sci-fi concepts, time travel, like any of those things. I think it's easier to imagine what it was like if we lived in a dystopia because I think we're in the bad place. So and I think that we can, and I've heard this from authors that I've chatted about who've done Y sci-fi. I've heard about this from authors who've wanted also to sell sci-fi concepts. It is a harder sell. I think there is less widespread commercial success for these kinds of things. I think that with genre fiction, so sci-fi, fantasy, although fantasy is booming, but with kind of genre fiction as well, it can be an extra hurdle. It can be an extra nuance to it that is difficult to pitch to literary agents, difficult to pitch to publishers. And so knowing now, or how I feel now about it, and knowing more and more about the ins and outs of publishing, also publishing is a business, and so take that what you will, capitalist machine. So that's how I kind of feel now. I think I'm so desperately looking for all of these different sci-fi ideas and stories that I know are out there, but that are just not being chosen to be published. I think in that sense, self-publishing is an interesting sphere to be in. I'm not going to talk about this anymore, actually, because I think I'm going off on too much of a tangent. But in terms of how I feel about sci-fi now, I feel heartened because partly of my own echo chamber and wanting to find more diverse voices, more marginalized voices, and more interesting concepts. I feel like sci-fi is evolving. It's not evolving as fast as it could be because of the capitalist machine, and also because I still think largely that it's struggling under the weight of this kind of exclusionary mindset and still struggling behind that. A genre that I think has similar or has had or is going through similar conversations right now are kind of the stereotypes associated with the romance genre. And how the romance genre is evolving, how it's changing, and how it's negotiating these conversations. But I still think that the science fiction genre is still right now not getting to that point. As I said, I think that I've seen more and more diverse and more interesting science fiction cropping up. But I want more. I just really, really want that same sort of feeling. I want to go into a bookstore science fiction section and just see so much more on the shelf, see so many more people talking about it, and the really, really fascinating, interesting concepts. I also see this a lot in speculative fiction mashups. So mashups between science fiction and fantasy, which are so clearly science fiction and are marketed as fantasy. I get it. I get why they're doing it because it's easier to pitch, it's easier to sell, it's easier to place. But there's nothing I hate more when I read a book that I'm thinking is fantasy and it's a sci-fi thing and they've just done it to kind of get away from it, get around it, because I just think I think that it does a disservice to the readers. I think it does a disservice to the authors and what they can and cannot talk about. And also, it doesn't really evolve that in that sense. I've read a few of these recently in the past where I've just been thinking, why? Why are we doing this? And what's even frustrating or more frustrating is I know why we're doing this, but it still gets me. And so, yeah, I think the long-winded tangent, a whole bunch of tangents, that's why I said you should get a snack or a drink. That's kind of how I feel about the science fiction genre now. Let me know, though, down below if you'd like me to resurrect the topic or the series I was doing where I was kind of recommending more science fiction that I feel like would have more of appeal if people weren't immediately turned off of the label of science fiction or the label of this inaccessibility, right? And I think that if I try to think of genres which have really been struggling under the lack of diversity of voices and experiences, to me, sci-fi is pretty much at the top. This is a genre to me that I feel like is struggling under that still consistently, and I would love it not to be, but at the same time it's like that snake eating its own tail because it's struggling, because you're harder to sell and it's harder to, like, it's kind of a whole conundrum. And yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to make this video, because I've been feeling super nostalgic about how my feelings were when I first started reading sci-fi, how I feel with that experience. And I've just been thinking about it a lot recently at the end of the year and also in general about those feelings and about the genre. And I think when I think about, I mean, the fact of the matter is as well, diversity in publishing has been, while maybe getting better minorly, very minorly, and not really representative to the way that the world is, and specifically with the setbacks in 2025 as well, I'm not optimistic about the future, which is why I have consistently said that I feel like it's much easier to see or consider a future in which it's a dystopian future, because I think we're there. So yeah, I guess I'm making this as kind of a reflection, a call for hope, while also feeling very deeply unhopeful or feeling very deeply pessimistic. So, love that for me. Yeah, I just wanted to chat and ramble and I guess do like a little catch up video to chat about that. I hope you enjoyed. If you also, I'd love to know what other people's first experiences are with sci fi, what for other people's first, projects or things that they saw, first forays into science fiction were, and kind of just have a comment section where we can chat and chat about it. I hope you have a great rest of your reading day, week, month, and 2025 year, which is slowly, getting to the end. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.